Welcome back. I'm Doug Wheeler, and I am the owner and operator and proud host most of the time. It's been a while. I don't think it's been in this iteration of From the Belly podcast that I've had a guest host, and I have that today. And the reason I do is because it doesn't mean I don't know how to talk. I definitely know how to talk, but I'm a novice into this space of what we're going to be talking about today. So we had my guest today, the two of them. We had a Zoom call a ways back, and we just decided together in a very comfortable way, hey, let's do a podcast. It'll enrich us, and I'll think it'll enrich the mission of what Reverend Dr. Randy Woodley is all about. Anyways, I'm going to read some bios. You guys might get bored hearing all the things that you've done and said in the world. I might go on and on. I think I got like a 25-minute bio for each of you. So you'll probably just get up and leave. It's really a check on your humility. If you stay and you're just glued to it, that's not a good sign.
No.
You got to just say, go away. Okay. As I said, we have Dr. Randy Woodley. Randy, thank you for being here. Really honored to have you. Randy's an activist, scholar, author, teacher, and wisdom keeper of mixed white and Native American heritage, who speaks on justice, faith, and the earth, and indigenous realities. Randy is the author of numerous books, including, I'll name three of them, Becoming Rooted, Journey to Elohe, and How Western Christianity Got It Wrong. He and his wife Edith co-sustain Elohe Indigenous Center for Earth Justice and Elohe Farm and Seeds, which is outside of Portland, Oregon, and actually is about 17 miles from where I'm sitting, 17 or so miles, maybe as the crow flies. And my guest host today is my dear friend who we've been traveling together for, I think we're in our second decade. I met him while pursuing my first and only PhD. I'll tell you about his degrees in a second. You might have to get out your calculator. Dr. Lynn Gibson holds numerous degrees, and he does. He's got one undergraduate degree. He's got 2 masters. Am I right on that, Lynn? And 2 PhDs. He enjoys research, writing, clearly, and teaching, and is an active member of several professional organizations. Lynn recently hosted an event where, in quote, participants spent a day at Smith Life and Legacy in Maryville, Tennessee, where they experienced a symbolic, end quote, funeral for the traditional funeral, and explored transformative approaches to serving modern families. Funeral for the traditional funeral. That'll be a separate podcast because I can't just say, well, tell us about that because we don't have time today. Because we're going to be leaning into what Randy is about. And honestly, I don't know exactly what the questions are because I did not have the honor and sometimes anxiety around coming up with the questions. Lynn did. So Lynn, I'm at this point. Lynn, thank you for being here. I didn't thank you. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. I think this is my 3rd episode with 4th.
4.
Okay. 4th?
Yeah,
All
4.
Right. So it's great to be back with you and to have an opportunity to talk with Randy. I'm doing some writing on this subject in particular, and Randy has been such an inspiration to me. I thought I had read all of his books, but you rattled off one that I missed, so I've jotted it down. I have to get it after the call.
Good.
But no, it's great to have this time to have these conversations together. I think it's very, very important. An interesting connection that I made in one of Randy's books was that, so I'm located in East Tennessee near the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains. And I had read in one of Randy's books that, tell me if I got this right, Randy. So it's Randy's 3rd great grandfather is from a small town near where I am. It's located. It was called Tellico. So this is the land where the traditional Cherokee had lived and thrived for thousands and thousands of years. So as I'm looking out my window, I'm looking at Cherokee Street. So to have an opportunity to pick Randy's brain and talk about this and connect it to your podcast, I think is going to be terrific. So I've got a list of questions that probably keep us here for all day, but we'll get as many as we can. Is that okay, Doug?
That's fine. Let's just say this about Maryville, Tennessee. According to AI, you're 2,574 miles from where I sit and a little more or less on the either side of that number. So you're a long way from here, man.
Long way. Yeah. That's
long way. But this subject brings us together. So no, I'm ready. You just go ahead and
okay.
And and pick Randy's brain.
Well, and my questions don't really have any particular order. It's just all things that I thought were quite interesting for your listeners to be exposed to if they
Right.
don't know this already, because there's so much great wisdom to talk about. So the topic of your podcast this season, as I understand it, is why not church, or maybe why church? That's kind of how you're pulling it up.
Yeah.
And I think it's a curious title. It's an interesting title. It kind of presupposes, I think, some unrest, or perhaps a sense of maybe disinterest or disengagement for some folks, or even some disgust with the local church, just to be fair. And so, Randy, I thought it would be interesting if you could help us maybe understand what's going wrong, and I would love to hear from your perspective how indigenous wisdom and your body of work, like what you've learned with Cherokee and all of your dissertation research with a number of tribes, how could that wisdom help guide us toward more spirit-based change and renewal?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll say I don't speak for all Native people. I don't speak for all Kituas or Cherokees. I speak for myself. And when my wife allows it, I can speak for her too, but that's about it. So when you say an indigenous perspective, you're getting my perspective, which hopefully is based on some of our traditions and wisdom that I've received. And it's an interesting question, why church? But how many miles was it from Maryville till
2,574?
Okay, well, it's actually, in terms of like how people think about church, we're about 1,000,000 miles away because we live in what's called the none zone. Are you familiar with that, Lynn or Doug? You guys, yeah.
Yes, I am.
Lynn, are you familiar with the none zone?
Is it like like where we say the nuns that do not have any connection to a particular church? Is that what you're talking
That's
about?
right. Yeah.
Okay.
And we are right here in Oregon. We are like number one in the none zone. So
Really? Okay.
yeah, across the whole nation. And so people aren't loyal to church necessarily just because it's their denomination or the place their grandma went to, or anything like that. Whereas having lived in the South, I was born in Alabama. I've lived in Alabama. I've lived in Kentucky, and I've traveled all over the South. And so grandparents were from Alabama and Mississippi. So I understand the Southern culture when it comes to church. It's way different than here, although I even know that that's changing as well. And so you have a lot of people abandoning what has been organized religion and organized Christianity in particular. Yeah, on both more conservative sides and the more progressive sides. So it's sort of happening all over the place. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But the bottom line comes down to that Christianity has not walked its talk. Yeah. It's hypocritical, right? It's often been the opposite of what it claimed to be. And that's why I wrote this book that's coming out in July. It's called How Western Christianity Got It Wrong, because I wanted to explain to people what happened. It's not something that just happened.
By the way, that's the one I hadn't read yet. So
yeah. Well, you won't be able to get it until July 14th.
There you go. You're not behind, Lynn. You never were in class. You never were behind.
And yeah, it's an explanation of what happened, but it didn't just happen in the last 40, 50 years. What happened was over about the last over 2,000 years. And it starts way back in the age of Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and those folks, and how we became such influenced by Greek dualism and Greek philosophy, and how that became a part of the church. And then when the church married empire under Constantine, it was just a natural fit. And we've never been able to escape or separate ourselves from empire in terms of Western Christianity. And so I think people in this age of deconstruction and decolonization and indigenization and all the other things that we're into now, people are just seeing the fallacy of it all and saying, I think Jesus is a great guy, but I don't want anything to do with the church. And that's where I would say, when I started teaching about 20 years ago in the seminary, I would say at least half, maybe 75% of my students were looking, for some kind of job in a church or parachurch or some NGO or something like that. And when I left, which was in 2022, December 2022 is when I retired, I would say 75% were there for existential reasons. They were trying to sort of figure out if they wanted to hold on to their faith or not, and what would go through to get there. Yeah, we're experiencing what they call a sea change moment right now in terms of religion in America.
That's fascinating. I'm really looking forward to getting into that text that's coming out in July. That's perfect. We couldn't have timed that one any better, could we? to kick off our podcast with that. These are great. These are great ideas and so relevant to I know what Doug has collected. And Doug, I don't know if you're already planning this, but when you finish this series, you've had so many great guests. It's like, wow, if you could wrap it all up with a podcast, you pull everything together and say, we learned this and learned that, wouldn't that be terrific? Yeah, but just throwing that out there for a suggestion.
Thank you.
So my next question kind of goes in two parts. And Randy, you already mentioned part of it there, but several of your books that I've read, I really do appreciate. And it was kind of new to me, but this idea of decolonizing your faith. And so the two parts are, one, could you kind of talk about that a little bit, explain to listeners who may be unfamiliar with decolonization and what this term actually means. And then maybe two, you could share how decolonization may be something vital for helping reshape the Western Church, if there's hope for that.
Okay, let's do the first part first because I'll forget the second part. So until you have to ask it again.
Okay.
So decolonizing, we all have been part of a colonial empire. There's lots of them. And sort of the history of the West is the Greek Empire, then the Roman Empire, then the British Empire, and now the American Empire. And empire basically its job is to take territory and take the resources and the people and use it for their own benefits. And so basically the mode of operation is extraction. Extract from people what you can get for them in slavery, extract from people the land that they're on, which would be the Native American story, extract from women, poor people, other people of color, so that whatever it is that they can give you is what's important. Extract from the earth, the minerals, the oil, etc. And that's really the modus operandi of colonization. Along with colonization, we're told a lot of myths, and we have a predominant American myth here in this country. And that American myth is, hey, this is the land of opportunity. We believe in freedom. We are peacemakers of the whole world. We provide the same opportunities for everyone. And if you haven't been able to be successful, whatever that is, it's your own fault. It's not the fault of any kind of a system. That's you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, but the problem is when they take away your boots, you don't have any bootstraps. So I thought it was always ironic that they took all of our land and then they said, which was our capital, and now we want you to be good capitalists. And so we had nothing to make capital from. So that is the American myth. And to decolonize that myth, basically, that colonial myth, is to begin to pull and tug at the strings of untruth, expose the lies. It's like peeling layers from an onion. It's you expose one and then there's another one and you have to peel that off and go, well, what? And probably the quickest way for people to do that is to begin to be around and read from people who have had a different experience. So, people who during the civil rights era, people like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., people like Malcolm X, people like our friend's name, he wrote The Disinherited, what was his name? Anyway, I'm falling short.
Would it be Howard Thurman or?
Howard Thurman, thank you. Thanks so much. Fannie Lou Hamer, and we read their experiences. I remember hearing their experiences during the civil rights era. In Vietnam, we had our own group of different people. You had the American Indian movement, you had the Black Panthers, you had all the student movements, Students for Democratic Society, and all the rest. And even though people would automatically, what happens is the powers that be, the powers that uphold colonialism, they create a myth that tries to tarnish the one that's being told, right? And so you have that problem. And so now you have to work harder because now these people are terrible people, right? So you can't really listen to them. So people don't listen to them because people have said, oh, they're terrible people. Angela Davis, for example, in prison reform and different. And so they tarnish them and make them look bad. And so if you want to really find truth in this society where we're all swimming in colonialism, you have to really work hard to begin to hear other perspectives. And once you start, when you pull on the right thread, the whole bloody tapestry begins to unravel, right? And so we see this exact thing happening now. What's that?
Well, I was just going to mention, this is kind of the process that happens in real time, when you begin to engage writers like yourself for putting out some good things there. When you mentioned earlier about looking at the area of untruth and exposing lies, this is it's a sad, entrenched process for so many that we don't have any idea. And I think it was in your book on Ayla Hay that you were writing in the very beginning, and you said, something like self-help books sell a lot. This is not one of them, And you go in and you start pointing my attention to the Declaration of Independence. That hits home, And this is sad. It's embarrassing, but I want to confess it because I think there will be a lot of listeners that may have the same thing. I'm reading through it, and you quote the passage that talks about Native people as Indian savages. I'm
Right.
like, wait a minute, I don't remember that in there. So I quickly put down the book, open up my phone, look at the Declaration of Independence, and read it, and I was like, oh my word, it's here from the beginning. And it's shocking. It's very disruptive to hear. But then you start reading, like you said, this thread, you start pulling, and you realize how pervasive it is. But I thought I would share that story because that was something that happened to me in real time with one of your texts.
Well, and we're seeing it right now in Minneapolis. So we're watching, clear as day, a fellow holding a phone gets shot in the back 9 or 10 times. And immediately, and I mean within a half hour, the powers that be say, oh, he was brandishing a gun. No, he wasn't. But they will go as far, any colonial power will go as far as to even tell you, don't believe your own eyes. You can't believe your own eyes. You have to trust us. And that's the bottom line, is just trust us. We know what's best for you. So decolonizing is basically getting to the bottom of that and saying that's not my mythology anymore. That's not my story. That's not my narrative. I want to live by something different. And then we begin to put something back together.
Do you have any recommendations how local churches? The second part of my question was about this concept of decolonization. It seems like it's connected to Doug's question about the church, and that is, this is an opportunity for local churches to help reshape the way what they're doing, their lives together. And have you seen this happen in local congregations where they get a little serious about this? It's like, we need to have a time to come to terms with this and to address some of these lies. And that covered what you spoke of earlier as the breakdown of this has happened because of some hypocrisy, right? We're not smoking what we're selling, so to speak. Well, then there seems like the reverse of this could be true, right? Like maybe we address this and have the courage to talk about some of these things.
Yeah. So there's a number of us out who we don't just go out and speak for a living, but who get invited to speak at usually regional conferences or national conferences. My wife and I were invited to a couple of years back to speak as the plenary speakers for the Covenant Church this was in Orange County. We've spoken to Quakers, we've spoken to Mennonites, but we're definitely not the only ones. There's a lot of Native people. There's a lot of people with other perspectives out there who can come and just sort of do a weekend with you and help you. But it's not something you can just do in 1 hour on a Sunday morning, if that's what you're looking for. So, and then that's just the starting blocks, right? I was a sprinter. I was an all-state sprinter. The starting blocks are important. You're not going to win a race if you don't have good blocks, usually. But it's the race is on after that, and that's what you do after that is all about.
I read a book this past year that I thought was really terrific. It was written by Sherry Mitchell. It's called Sacred Instructions. But she was writing in there about this process of decolonization. And I like what she was talking about and the heavy lifting that it goes with that. But then she followed up exactly the way you just did there, which is really encouraging to me. But it gives me some hope in areas to grow, and that is not only is the decolonization part important, but reimagining a better world is the next step. We're not going to leave each other in despair, but what can we do to actually reimagine a better world? So I appreciate you talking about that.
Yeah, this definitely takes some imagination, right? It takes some understanding that we've been in this box for a long time, and you have to actually begin to think out of the box or expose yourself to people who think out of the box so that you can kind of get there. So, and
I'm amazed that this is not one of my questions, but just kind of a follow-up to this. It's been amazing to me and so encouraging and impactful as you begin to go through and think about the decolonizing piece. You kind of strip some things away from your faith. It doesn't strip everything away. What's left is some really good things. And I've been fascinated with looking at different indigenous tribes and different perspectives and how they say so many core things that's so vital to my faith that maybe I've ignored or not has explored as much as I should have. And I think it's fascinating to have encouragement towards those things. And that's, of course, things like a connection to one another, to nature. Kind of goes back to some of the basics, I guess, but it's very encouraging that there's lots of room there to reimagine what this church could be as the church grows and evolves as well. Are we ready for another question?
Can I say just a few things?
Sure.
Listening to you talk, Randy, and your interaction, Lynn, with Randy, reminds me of an important book I just read. I was turned on to Douglas John Hall, the great Canadian theologian, by a friend here at church, First Baptist Church in McMinnville. And he wrote many books. He was actually not only a colleague, but a friend of Walter Brueggemann's. And I had never even heard of Douglas John Hall, but his book, I recommend it to the two of you. It was written in 1985. It's called, let me pull it up to make sure I get the title right. And I guess my point is not only the book, but it's called The Stewardship of Life in the Kingdom of Death. What a title. The Stewardship of Life in the Kingdom of Death. And of course, he comes at it with this whole North American dream. Randy, you spoke to that. And just this kind of positivism, and how to build people's lives and how to build a society. You're actually building an empire, which has been built. But it's a kingdom of death, literally, for people, because it steals, as you said, Randy, and then asks people to buy back things or trade things or barter things, But man, that was a powerful book. But I think one of the things that I was left with, and as I listened to you guys, that book was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And I guess the question I have is, we've seen these uproars before. Who knows how long the riotous behavior will continue and this upheaval we're in, and maybe things will calm down. And I'm not saying that they should, but it kind of runs that rhythm of like a riot on the street, and then everything calms down, and maybe a few years down the road another one happens. It just seems like it's what is that phrase? Wash, rinse, repeat. It's like I mean, Randy, you turn 70 soon, if I've got that correct.
That's right.
And all that you've witnessed, and the heartache of all of it. How do we have hope that something's going to happen within this society that's owned by empire? And my life is clearly, it's I feed off of it just like anybody else. I'm trying to change that. But anyways, what gives you hope? And then, when a church gets really serious about this decolonization process, does it actually melt down into nothing? And that is, we probably ought to just close the doors and maybe down the road start something new. But does it have to go all the way down before it can come back up? Or is it just a process of it changes as it goes? So that's kind of a two-part question.
Yeah, I think the latter is probably more correct. It changes as it goes. Some places might need to shut down. Others might do something different. I think I give some suggestions in the book. I say what you should do is every church building, because they're all built on stolen land and they all cost Native people lives usually to be there. At least families disrupted and moved and everything else. They should probably sell all the church buildings, give the money to indigenous or other peoples who were exploited and extracted from in order to be there, and then start new, because until we deal with what's gone on in the past, you're really not ever going to be able to move forward. So that's the sort of number one. But then I say, but if you're not going to do that, as if anyone will, right? If you're not going to do that, then here's about 10 things that you ought to be doing when you're looking at trying to create a church that, or I don't even call it church. I'm not trying to reconstruct the church. I don't think Jesus ever meant to start a church, and he certainly never became a Christian. And if he ever did want to start a church, it wouldn't look anything like Western Christianity. So I think we're just, in the wrong place, and we need to start over. Whether that means to physically get rid of everything and start over, it might be that. It probably is that, because we're such a materialistic people, that's what it would take. Like the rich young ruler, the parable of the rich young ruler, in order for people to be actual healed. And I don't use that word salvation because I think that's a poor translation. The word healing is a lot better translation. So you can take your Bible, and almost everywhere it says salvation, you can say healing. And for us to be healed, for the church to be healed, for the Western church to be healed, I think it's going to have to do something that has to do with what it loves most. And what it loves most is money and things and individualism and competition, and it has to go the opposite way. So I'm really preaching like the old time revivalists. I'm preaching repentance, because repentance isn't changing your mind and then just doing something different. Repentance is, I was going this way 100 miles an hour, and now I have to get rid of all of that and turn around, and I was entangled in all these things of empire and all these things of colonialism, all these things of taking things and extracting things. And now I have to go the opposite way and entangle myself to everything that would send me in that direction. That's what repentance is. And so I'm just like that old time revival preacher. I'm preaching repentance to the churches. It's just that people have forgotten what that word actually means.
Well, that's some great words. And Doug, I appreciate your bringing up the idea of hope, because I'm a person that thrives on hope. I have to have hope.
And that's the hope, by the way. That's my answer to the hope, is to actually repent, do something about it, make restitution, and then entangle yourself in everything that would lead you in that righteous way.
Doug, I think this part that I share right now is going to probably hit you. It's like it hit me the first time I read it, because this was shocking and surprising. So, by the way, if you read Randy's books, you usually you read a little bit, and you're going to have to close it up. You have to think about some of these things, and then you go back in. So in this particular book, I got to the first quote before the preface. I didn't get very far in, but Randy, this is from a Shoshone elder, which I'm guessing in connections maybe with your wife's family somehow. Doug, check out this quote. This starts a book. This is from a Shoshone elder. It says, "Do not begrudge the white man for coming here, though he doesn't know it yet. He has come to learn from us." That's powerful. And I see the things that you're talking about, Randy, with the repentance and saying we're going to have to go a different way. And it gives me hope that there are elders and teachings out there that seem to think it's time and we're ready. I don't know, this is a little bit off script for me, but I've run into this a few times, Randy, and I don't know if this is something you can speak to or not, but it seems like some of a common teaching you see, or at least reported here and there, is this idea of a seventh generation that you see in indigenous teachings, that there's a seventh generation where things could be different. Things may revitalize or change. I don't know. Is that something you can speak to at all to teach us a little bit?
It's pretty common across Indian country and different understandings of our tribal beliefs. But everybody says, think about the next 7 generations when you make a decision. And make your decisions based on how it will affect them. And some people go 3.5 generations back, 3 forward, and 1.5 forward, and I'm in the middle. But basically it just means, long range planning. You think about how these decisions today are going to affect people generations down, my great grandkids, not just how they're going to affect me.
So important.
But that's the opposite of Americans. Americans are about proficiency. They're about getting things done quick. They're, time is money. We're wasting time. There's not enough time. It's like, we're here on earth. We actually got lots of time, but we've created it into a commodity, and that commodity, we think we can buy it and sell it, basically. And that's a weird way to look at reality, right? Whereas an indigenous worldview basically looks at relationship and says, that's what's important. That's what's of value. I know I'm supposed to be here, but I can't interrupt this relationship to be there. So we call that Indian time. You show up a half hour later because something else was going on, right? And people laugh and joke about it. And whether they go to the Philippines, they call it Filipino time, or Hawaii Island time, or, wherever. Everybody sort of has one that doesn't run by that Western clock inside your head, right? And so that has a lot to do with this.
There's so many good things in here.
Yeah, I was going to say that prompts so many questions, doesn't it, Lynn?
It really does. It really does. But I think we're getting just a taste of even though we're not, as we ease into this, there's so much for us to learn and embrace and integrate into our lives. As Randy says, repent, So that kind of brings me to this next question. Doug, can I proceed, or do you have anything else?
Please, care.
Okay. Well, and again, these are kind of just things that came to mind to me that I had jotted down, saying, hey, I've got a few minutes here with Randy. I want to make the most of it. But Randy, one of your teachings that really made an impact on me, and I don't know if it will hit everyone else the same way, because it uses what I call in East Tennessee some fancy words. So you're going to have to explain these fancy words. But you talk in several of your texts about this idea of epistemological orthodoxy, sort of the Western church, versus epistemological orthopraxis. These are fancy words, but I really feel like this is also very pertinent to Doug's work on the church. And I didn't know if you could talk about these terms and concepts and how they differ and how they apply to us.
Now, pertinent, there's a pretty fancy word too.
That's right.
I feel like it's calling the kettle black here.
That's right.
Oh, I
That's
know
right.
some fancy words.
So
About a half dozen fancy words. No,
that's my Alabama coming out.
I love it.
Yeah. So, and I do have to apologize. My books are getting better. Like that I think you're quoting that from Shalom and the Community of Creation, an Indigenous Vision, and that also has the chapter on time in it, by the way, that we were just talking about. But that's sort of how I was trying to break down the differences between Western thinkers and Indigenous thinkers, and Western worldview and Indigenous worldview. And it's very helpful still, the chart and everything I have in there, but I've actually gone much further in that. And I have some even better lists and things now that talk about the differences. But the basic thing you're talking about. So epistemology, by the way, that's one of the words that me and three other Native guys who went to seminary together as a cohort, that was one of the first words we learned and laughed about. It's like, epistle what? So we had to learn these things. But epistemology, of course, just means how you come to know things. That's as simple as that. How do you come to know things? We all come to know stuff through different ways. And what I'm saying is that Indigenous people and Western people generally, there's always exceptions and things, but come to know things in different ways. So epistemological orthodoxy means those kind of truths that have been passed down. So if we say, oh, you're an Orthodox Christian, that means that you toe the line, basically, with the beliefs and all those kinds of things. And orthodoxy is about beliefs. So you come to know about God in a Western worldview through your belief systems. They're passed down. So that's epistemological orthodoxy. Orthopraxis sounds like the word practice because that's really what it is, orthopraxis. So correct doctrine or correct practice. Correct practice is observing, watching, it's living. It's not so much about somebody telling you this is what you should believe, but it's that this is how you live. And you live by watching me live. And you live by learning by watching me. And then maybe once in a while I might tell you something, but it's mostly about being passed down through practices. And so there's a difference in terms of, I was comparing Indigenous religion or spirituality and Western spirituality and Western religion. And so one is passed on through beliefs. They call it the faith once delivered to the saints, and you pass it down, you keep passing it down. But that's not, Indian people don't have beliefs. I mean, in fact, there's a chart on the page before that shows, it's a pie chart, and it shows that the Western worldview is almost all beliefs. And then there's a little room for orthopraxis, and there's a little bit of room for, but you can just justify anything according to beliefs in that worldview. There's almost nothing in that pie chart for Native beliefs because we don't have beliefs. So I tested this out during that time when I was writing the book, and I talked to some elders, and I said, hey, what's your spiritual beliefs? Well, they didn't tell me, well, I think Jesus was born of the virgin birth, and he came down from heaven. He was God incarnate, and he lived and died for my sins, and he rose again on the third day. And that's Western Christianity. What several of them said, and it was almost the same. Well, I believe in being a good husband. I need to be a good husband to my wife. I need to be a good father. I believe in helping people when they come to me. If they need a hand, I want to help them. I believe in hospitality, which none of those are officially beliefs, by the way. What are they? They're practices. They're life. That's how you live. And so there's very much a difference between worldviews and how we come to know those and understand those.
Doug, I don't know if this kind of hits you the same way that it hits me, but I just is like, this is a significant, profound way to retool and think, I guess, in a different way, like what Randy was talking about. Randy, so the way this kind of hit me as I worked through the text, I'm like, oh my God, Randy just kind of explained Jesus to me in a different way. So like if I was if I was honest with my other friends in seminary and other people that like to study theology like I do, I would probably have said, like Jesus frustrates me sometimes in the text. He does, because he doesn't answer questions like I'm wanting to. I want a clear statement, an orthodox systematic theology, and he's like, faith is like a mustard seed, so he goes into these stories and kind of explains things like that. And so as I'm learning, as Randy is teaching some of this in his books, I'm thinking, oh my God, this is so true as you think about the life of Christ. And even like the Last Supper, he's given instructions to go and do this. It's not like whatever happens next, be sure you believe these three things. It wasn't that. It was go and do this. And what was he doing? He was serving one another. So I don't know. I just thought it was a beautiful way you had teed it up. And I'm excited to see how you've changed that and maybe fine tune it even more. Trying to find some other fancy word or some ways to explain it without using the fancy words. So that was helpful to me.
Yeah, I have a book. Well, I have several books. I kind of talk about those, but the newest one has the fullest explanation of them. But so if I know, is it appropriate for me to share one of Jesus' parables on here? Is it that too religious for everybody?
Oh gosh, no.
No? Okay. So
absolutely not.
So I think that the parable that exemplifies this the most, and the one that should speak the loudest to the church right now in America, is where Jesus says he's talking to a bunch of scribes and Pharisees, the know-it-alls, right? And he says, a farmer had two sons. Now, I like that story because I'm a farmer and I have two sons. And these guys remind me of my sons. And he tells one son, go out and work in the field. And the guy says, okay, no problem. And he doesn't go. And he tells the other son, go work in the field. And the guy says, I am so tired of working in the field. I can't stand farming. I hate this place. I'm not ever going to do this for the rest of my life. And then he goes out and he works in the fields. And Jesus says, now, which one was justified before God? It was the one, and they have to say it was the one that did it. And what he was telling those know-it-alls, those orthodoxy-oriented people, is it doesn't matter what your beliefs are. I always say Jesus didn't give a damn about beliefs. He cared about what people do. He cared about how people live and how they treated one another. And so, it's not about what you believe. We can say we believe whatever. And we've said it year after year, just like that sign that says everybody's welcome in the church, but yet you bring somebody in who's a little different and they're not quite welcome anymore, are they? So this is the idea that having the correct beliefs makes you closer to God and more spiritual. And people have literally killed one another over this. They have started wars with countries over this. They have burned people at the stake and drowned them after they were dead because of beliefs. That everything that's inhumane that you can imagine has been done to Christians doing to other Christians because they thought they don't have the right beliefs. And again, Jesus didn't give a damn about beliefs. There was no gap between when Jesus said, do you believe? He didn't mean like, do you think this is right? He meant like, are you jumping on board? Are you doing this? It's like, here's a great example. I love this example. Maybe you guys are old enough to remember Carl Walinda, the Flying Walinda family, the tightrope walker over.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Carl Walinda was the dad, and he was going to walk across Niagara Falls. And there's, of course, a big crowd, and they all came out. This was in, I think, the 70s. And he said, how many believe I can walk across Niagara Falls and back? And they all, raised their hand. Yeah, I can do it. So he did it. And he came back and he said, how many believe that I can walk across with somebody on my shoulders? And they all raised their hands again, because, if he did it once, he could do it again. And then he said, who wants to get on my shoulders? And everybody's hand went down, right? Because they didn't believe.
That's great.
That's good.
To believe you can do it and then to do it are two different things. Sorry if I get preaching here. I haven't done any preaching in a long time. So
I love it, Randy. So I was wanting to kind of revisit something we've touched on earlier, and I think it's a good time to do this because I want to be sensitive to our time as well. But I know that both of you share a common friend who had, in my opinion, wisdom and your addition. I know he's endorsed both of your works at different times, which is an amazing honor. But I'm referring to, of course, about the great late Walter Brueggemann. And Randy, I didn't know if you could take a moment or two and maybe explain a little bit, kind of riff on this understanding of what Walter meant in his text when he talked about empire, he talked about the prophetic imagination. And I don't know if we want to go too far into this, connecting it to the current political climate and how our ideas exasperate this whole long-standing problem of greed, power, control, all these kinds of things. But I'd love to hear a little bit about that thought on empire just a bit.
Well, first of all, Walter Brueggemann and I weren't really friends. I only met him one time, and I was afraid.
It's a good story, though, of how you met him.
Huh?
It's a good story of how you met him. I think you need to lead with that really quickly.
I was doing a workshop at the same place that he was doing a plenary, and my wife kept saying, when someone said that's Walter Brueggemann, well, I had read his book Peace, which got me started on this whole shalom journey that's carried me now the rest of my life because it affected me so much. It was, I would say, literally one of the books that changed my life. And because it just all made sense. It just brought everything together that I knew about Jesus and living in our native ways. We had a very, when he talked to us about shalom, the Jewish construct, it has so many native understandings. So my wife was going, go over and introduce yourself. Well, my wife and I are both introverts, right? So we're and I wouldn't do it. And then finally, my friend Richard Twist came over and he was like, "You want to meet Brueggemann? Yeah, come on." No. So he pulls me up from the table and takes me over and introduces me, and I'm like, I feel like I'm meeting a Hollywood movie star or something like that. And I know Brueggemann's a very humble person. And so I got to have a little conversation with him, and based on that, then he began endorsing he endorsed the book that I told him about, and I think he endorsed he wrote a foreword or afterward for my children's book, and I think he endorsed one or two other ones afterwards, and so I only knew him in that way, and honestly, I've read The Prophetic Imagination, and I read his book on Sabbath. But besides Peace, those are the only 3 books I've ever read of his, even though I know he's written multitude of books. So I'm not really the person to ask this question. Maybe Doug can answer that question a lot better than I can.
Well, let me just say, Randy, you got 30 years left. You get to 100.
Yeah.
maybe 31.
I have some of those books. I just haven't read them yet. So.
And according to what you said about India time, you have time.
That's right.
But I don't know if you can get through all of them in 30 years.
How many books did he write? It's unreal, isn't it?
It's over 100.
Is it really?
It really is. I mean, I heard 60 and whatever. Yeah. I think it's over 100. Let's see. Well, I'll say this about my time with Walter. Isn't grief an interesting thing? I was thinking about Walter this morning, and I was trying to locate inside of me, in my interior, I was trying to locate my grief of losing Walter. And I knew it, knowledge-based. I could say, okay, I know it's in there, but I didn't feel it. But when you brought up his name today, I felt it. I feel it now, just that loss. So I want to speak to the concept of encounter in a minute. But in regards to Walter, one of the first times I met him, I won't go into all those details, but he spoke at an event, and I was able to get him to come to the event. And he invited me at St. Mark's. He was speaking the next morning, and he invited me to come, and it was open to the public. And so I walked in with my friend Denny Gunderson, and it was a shining moment for me because we had that time the night before, but it was more around the formality of he spoke, and I took him back to his place at St. Mark's, and it all kind of felt like, okay, that's part of the package of what you do. What happened when I walked in the room at St. Mark's, in that basement room, never forget, I walked in, and he's doing his teaching, and he's really into it, and he looks up and he sees me, and he stops. And he says, Doug, good to see you. That was Walter. And so, but I say that to say it was touching. But during that time, it was question and answer time. And boy, I was tight in the throat around, okay, is my question any good? And is it, and I'm going to get this, whatever. But I thought, it's a short one. And I said, Walter, would you speak to, in your book, Finally Comes the Poet, which, by the way, Walter told me, I know he told me this over lunch. People think my favorite book that I would ever say by Walter Brueggemann would say Prophetic Imagination. But he said that was my most popular book. But my most favorite book I ever wrote, this was at a few years before he passed, was Finally Comes the Poet. And he said, that was my watershed moment. That's when I came. Really, when you read it and then you get to know Walter, you just go, oh, so finally comes Walter. Really, finally comes the poet. But he uses the text in Daniel. He uses Daniel 1 and 2 during the last chapters on relinquishment and resistance, I think it is. And he uses the first in second chapter of Daniel. Very, and you know, Walter, with any text, you just go, how in the world did you extrapolate that? But he had a little sentence. And so my question was, would you say more about, and I raised my hand. He said, yes. I said, would you say more about that sentence you wrote? And finally comes the poet on page. And I remembered the page then. It says, Daniel risked his oddness. Daniel risked his oddness. And it's literally, that's the sentence. And Walter said, I don't remember writing that. That's what he said in front of everybody. Maybe those are the best authors. He said, I don't remember writing that. And he didn't have much more to say about it. But I think that's a profound concept about oddness. And I think about the days that we're in, and I bring it down to how odd am I willing to be, especially with my friends or the people that are closest to me, when I want to say something that possibly would be in disagreement or whatever. And I know it all starts at the ground level of how odd am I willing to be in those settings and in even larger settings. I'm considering writing somebody in the government of McMinnville right now, and it's going to present me as odd, the take that I have on something. That always challenges me. And I think, man, young Daniel, man, he was willing. And Walter says in the book, essentially, it was because of his devotion and faithfulness to God. But I just wanted to mention that about Walter. But, one of the things that I think a running theme through Walter's work was encounter. Here's a biblical scholar that you didn't just end up living in your head, but he was calling you to encounter various things. I want to ask Randy, if you don't mind, Lynn, I want to ask Randy about what takes place at Elohe around encounter, these type of transformational experiences that shift us out of knowledge head base and can change somebody's theology and orientation because of an experience or a host of experiences. All of a sudden, they believe differently. Would you speak to that, Randy?
Well, at Elohe, we don't plan transformation. We see plenty of it. Honestly, I don't know if we'd still be doing this. Probably we would. Because when you said what brings you hope, my first response was, well, what else are you going to do? So, what else are we going to do but what we're doing? It's the right thing to do.
That's good.
But good. We see people transform. They write us and they tell us how their direction of their life has changed and, all these things, and they thank us and they're so nice. And we sat around, the four of us who do teaching, myself, my wife, Edith, Jim Sakura, Lenore 3 Stars. And we go, what is it? And it's like, well, it's really hard to put your finger on it. But I think Jim comes the closest, and he just says, it's just hospitality. Have a sense of vulnerability and hospitality. And then, there's all the teaching and stuff, and we're getting people physically in touch with what they thought was spiritual before, or maybe just material. And they understand that there's a spirituality of the land and a spirituality of where they live, and spirituality in the plants, and there's a spirituality in their relationship with this, and then all of each other. I like one of Lenore's phrases is probably the most wise thing I've ever heard happen here. I heard her say one time to people about theology, she said, and she was talking about the whole community of creation. So the earth, the trees, the land, the soil, the biome, the birds, the animals, the fish, the water, and human beings as the whole, what I call the whole community of creation. And she said, and we were talking about how the difference in an indigenous way is that those are our relatives. We treat them well because they're our relatives. They are a part of us. We're a part of them. We're the same stuff. And she said, if your theology doesn't make you a better relative, then you should find a new theology. And to me, that is sort of like, maybe that encapsulates what we do here. We hopefully make people a better relative to the whole community of creation, including people.
I'm taking notes and learning as we go. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful thought. It reminded me of I won't get it right, but it's something that's impacted me as well was Henry Nouwen. His quote on hospitality seemed to match real well with what you're describing there at Elohe. He said something about hospitality is not to change someone, but to provide space where change can take place. And That
like
seems
that.
like that's what you're saying. And it's really interesting, Randy, when you're talking about the whole community of creation. It's like you say these phrases like that's a phrase like we got to really work on, because I'm thinking about maybe some poor hermeneutics that the West has used to approach Genesis 1 and 2. Like we read Genesis 1, we're like, we're here to have dominion and subdue, which we translate as to dominate and to extract as much as we can. And Randy, you're explaining this as we're in a relationship. This is a
Right.
family.
That's what that first story is about.
Radical
It's
different
all about
ways
relationship.
to interpret that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's how, the sun and the moon and the stars and the waters and and then the people, they're all related, right? This is about relationship. And then there's the whole thing about taking care of the garden. Well, we're going to take care of it now, because you guys are the ones with like 2 feet, a strong back, and 5 fingers. What do we call these? In oppositional thumbs or whatever they're called. What are they called? The
Opposable thumbs. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're the best ones to take care of this and make sure that it all gets done right. And you're the best ones to repair it, when it goes amok, when it gets out of harmony. And so to me, this is all about, number one, relationship. And number two, like our main role as human beings is to care for the garden, and to care for the garden, or what I would call the whole community of creation. It might be physically doing what Edith and I do out here, taking care of the biome and trying to restore the original plants, and to grow things that are without pesticides and that are without genetic modifying and all. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's bringing water to people who don't have water. Maybe it's rescuing women from, or men or anyone from human trafficking. Maybe it's it's feeding people who are simply hungry, like Chef what's his name, Andrews does, and he goes around to Haiti and other places and just feeds them. That's our role. And if we're not doing that, we're not living up to our human potential. So whatever that little piece is that is given us to do, to tend creation, to tend the garden, to tend the whole community of creation, that's good enough. That's what we do. That's what we're meant to do.
That's what we do.
Doug, I was reminded recently in a book I've just started called Reading the Bible on Turtle Island, which is it's a great name, but it's a book about sort of, I guess, indigenous hermeneutics. And again, like they start right here and echo exactly what Randy is talking about, how, like in our minds is like, this is something I used to really hold on very dearly to. And the writers of this text is like, when you look back at the Hebrew, there's rooms to have a very different nuance to this. And that is thinking that my role here on planet Earth is to till or cultivate and keep, which has kind of a Western extractive mindset to it. And in their text, they're saying, well, there's room here to understand this as, no, our place here is to serve and to conform, to go with the rhythms of the earth and to work along that way, which is all relational. What Randy is saying, very, very different ways that has enormous implications on everything we do.
And that's what Douglas John Hall was getting at about stewardship.
Yeah.
That's what he was getting at.
Yeah.
I know
It's
both
stewarding what we've been given. What's that?
I know both those young fellas that wrote that book.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Good.
you do? Okay. That's great. That's great. I haven't had the privilege to meet them yet, but I look forward to one day. I had just one more question, Doug. I don't know if we have time. Do we have one more? Just.
Oh, we do. I want to ask Randy one thing about in regards to the harmony and connection of all things. It's a big topic. Randy, what about our dead ancestors? What's the interaction there, if there is? What people will say that they have encounters. People will say that they can feel a presence. I can say that about certain relatives, and others that I can't. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I'd say, why are you questioning it then?
Well,
and I feel bad for those others. They're missing out.
That's all I needed. Yeah, wouldn't you know? I'm the guy in a webinar. Do you know the name Francis Weller? My bet is you do know that name. Francis Weller he is like the guy in a good way about grief work. I got introduced to him at Sacred Groves, that beautiful feminine space on Bainbridge Island.
You're talking about some Kentucky bourbon, but you're talking about something different.
I am talking about something different. I am talking about something different.
Well, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. But Francis Weller, I was involved in a live, one of these webinar engagements, and he was live, and I threw my question in there, and I said, So how do you know, you spoke about the ancestors, Francis, how do you confirm this or whatever? But it was a very Western minded question. I felt like Randy just kind of reminded me. And he said, the woman read it to him and he said, I just know. And that
Well,
was it.
yeah.
And I
Well,
went,
you answered your own question when you said,
I did,
I
man.
feel them. And I'm like,
And
well,
I
that's
do.
what you need, right?
All
That's
right,
it.
man. I appreciate that. Lynn, it's all yours. Let's say we've got another 10 minutes.
Sure, sure. I was thinking, Doug, like, but that inclination that you have is part of that decolonization process. It's like I do the same thing. I try to reach for that. What's that fancy word? Logical orthodoxy. I got to find that one truth. Randy gives you a story. You know what I mean? But that's the yeah. That's where it is.
That's it. That's
Yeah,
it.
and it doesn't. What's beautiful? It's not any more complicated than that. I just know.
That's exactly right.
I just know.
We try to explain theology, but theology is what you live. It's not got anything to do with what we try to explain.
Yeah.
Well said.
Right on, man.
Well, I don't know if we could end with this question or not, if we want to take it another different direction. Kind of thinking about, hopefully did a decent job with some listeners who've intrigued and piqued their interest. If they haven't thought about learning some indigenous ideas and how it may have impact on their own faith in an encouraging way. Randy, what would you say if you wanted to advise someone or just guide them if they say, hey, this is new to me? Where can I begin my learning journey with this? Start to consider, the value of this wisdom for their faith in their life.
Yeah. Well, normally I like to spend time talking with people to answer their questions. A lot of times I'll get in conversations with people and, I say, shoot me an email and you want to talk further about this and that kind of thing. But what I really don't like is people who have never read my books and then want me to like rewrite the books in their head. Right. So it's like, don't come to me to get you to start from, the first step. Come to me after you've gone through all the steps and then you have questions. Right. So, because I literally, and here's where I guess I do have a Western time. I don't have time for that. Right. So,
there's only so much time.
Yeah. There's only so much time. My board always tells me, don't answer people like that, and I'm like, no, I just tell them, well, read a bunch of my stuff, here's some suggestions or here's some other people you can read to, and then think about these things for a while, then come back and send me your questions,
I can promise you, if you read even one, you will sit with it and it will work on you and you'll come up with questions. Do you have, Randy, like a go-to book of your own that you would say, maybe begin there, or it just depends on where they are?
Yeah, it depends on where they're at. I mean, the first thing I did was I wrote a book on diversity. This was like back in 1999, 2000. And people thought, it's real funny. I was being interviewed on radio stations when it came out, and the number one question I got back then, and these were all white DJs, right, was, well, do you really think there's any problem with racism and diversity now in our day and age? And then 9/11 happened and nobody wanted to talk about diversity. In fact, my book went out of print. I'd sold 5,000 copies in the first year and Baker Books put it out of print because nobody wanted to talk about it. So, and I was the first book to present diversity from a non-black white binary sort of a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then within a year, InterVarsity Press contacted me and said, hey, we love your book. We want to use it for teaching. We won't probably even change anything except for we want to change the title to Living in Color, Embracing God's Passion for Ethnic Diversity. And we want you to write like 7 questions at the end of every chapter that our students can discuss. And I said, perfect, let's do it. So that was the first one. But the second book that I wrote sort of is Shalom in the Community of Creation, an Indigenous Vision. If people want to sort of get started on the indigenous differences between Western and all that, that's a good place to start.
Right.
If you're a missionary or you've ever been a part of a missionary organization, then I have a book called The Mission and the Cultural Other, a closer look that could be helpful possibly. And then if you just want to know about mine and Anita's sort of personal experience with what we're doing now and all that, Journey to Elohe is a good one. And we basically talk about those values that I discovered in my PhD work, but we talk about how we've tried to live them and experiences with them and with other people. So, yeah. And then the sort of what's the top of the heap that's coming out is this how Western Christianity got it wrong. That's the one that's going to get me banned in a lot
I was
of
going to
places.
say,
Yeah.
we'll still have you here.
But that's
They
why I
might
go
shut-
into detail about what's really happened with the church and empire over all these years. And I go into a lot of detail about what's happened over the different councils and all the sort of like I take apart people's pet theologies about hell and Satan and
Wow.
the God and foreknowledge and all those kinds of things. So it's pretty detailed in terms of taking apart all the tools that the empire church has held over people.
Well, I can't wait to get a hold of that one. Randy, we might have a book club that's been going on for probably over 5 years here that's made up of a lot of local pastors, and we have a college professor. We've got different people from my community. And so we just finished reading Shalom in the Community of Creation. And wow, did it ever make an impact. I mean, we've got some smart, great, wonderful people of faith, and you really challenged them to really think outside their own boxes. And it was a beautiful time of learning and sharing with one another.
Well,
So I want to thank you for that.
That one came as a result of Walter Brueggemann's book, Peace, being the catalyst for that. So it really ignited my love for understanding this and everything I wrote about that.
It always goes back to Brueggemann, doesn't it?
What's that?
Seems like everything always goes back to Brueggemann, and there's always a connection somehow.
Also, I want to just ping off of what you just said there, Randy, about in one sense debunking all these beliefs, hell and all this. It reminds me of a song I was just listening to on the way to work this morning. I have a short commute, so I just remember one little phrase: God's love shines through a prism. I'm so confused by Calvinism. I love that line.
Yeah, well, you should be confused because
I love that line. I'm more than confused by it. I'm not confused by it anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't think that author is either.
I had one other little Brueggemann story. It really didn't have anything to do with him, but there used to be a friend of mine. In fact, we did a podcast together called Piecing It All Together, Peacing. And I think we did 94 or 5 episodes. It's still online if people want to go to it, and just talked about all kinds of things. We never knew ahead of time. It was like, hey, have you been reading about this? Let's talk about it, So me and Bo Sanders, and Bo used to be a part of a podcast called Homebrewed Christianity, and then also Theology Nerd Throwdown. And I think it was on Theology Nerd Throwdown, somebody was talking, and I was looking at because the thing came up and said your name was mentioned, right? Google, whatever, So I look, and somebody had written like, yeah, well, did you see that Brueggemann endorsed his book? And I guess this would have been about the 3rd book that Brueggemann had endorsed for me. And then the other guy writes, well, he and Woodley have a bromance going. And I only met him one time. That was a great compliment, right?
Absolutely. If you're going to have a bromance,
Yeah. That's right. Well, it might be time to call today. Oh, I got something stupid I got to say. I just got to say this because y'all were talking that country talk before, and this is rattling around in my brain. Tell me if this works. When you talk about epistemology, how about that some country fella that hears it and says, well, I got to take epistemology? That works, doesn't it?
It does. I might work on that. Run it out a little longer, though,
Well, I have to say it Southern-wise, but I don't.
You got to have to slow way down, Doug. You have to slow way down.
Oh, I know. I didn't say it the way it needed to be said.
Yeah, I got a good Southern joke we can end with if you want.
We'd love to.
It's really quite revelatory.
Please give it to them.
2 fellas are out in the boat and they're fishing. It's what we do down south. Put your bobber in the water and wait for the bluegill to dunk it under. One guy, he got philosophical and he says, "Hey, what do you think's the most incredible invention of the 20th century?" The guy thinks, and finally says, "Maybe the telephone, maybe television, I don't know." And he said, "Oh, okay, yeah, that was pretty cool." He said, "What do you think it is?" He said, "Well, it's the thermos." He said, "What?" He said, "The thermos." He goes, how in the world could it be a thermos?" He said, "Well, think about it." He said, "You put hot stuff in it and it stays hot. You put cold stuff in it and it stays cold." Other fellow says, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, how do it know?"
How do it know?
How do it know?
How do it know? Now, Lynn, you live down there. You never heard that one.
Oh yeah, but it's going to be floating around in my neck of the woods in the morning. I'm gonna send that out.
Yeah. No, I have to say, at heart, I'm a Southerner, right? I mean, I make biscuits and gravy, and I
We
eat
can hear
collard
it.
greens and black-eyed peas and cornbread every New Year's and Eve and or New Year's Day. You know, my parents were alive. As soon as they'd start talking, I'd get a Southern accent. My wife knew exactly
Yeah.
who I was talking to.
Oh,
You know,
yeah. It
so I
still happens
consider
to me.
myself a Southerner
Yes.
at heart. You know, so that's the reason I feel like I can tell that joke.
So, Lynn, I want to end with this. And the cool thing is this podcast belongs to us. So, and we're working on that I guess Indian time. So we haven't gone over. We can
That's
just keep
right.
going if we want to.
That's
But
right.
I want to go back to seriously, and I think this really fits. So, Lynn, I mentioned this in your bio. You exploring transformative approaches to serving modern families. You recently hosted or experienced a symbolic, end quote, funeral for the traditional funeral. You did that, right? So is that kind of, do we transpose that on to most of our kind of Christian belief,
Well, it's interesting. So
church?
yeah. Well, I wound up hosting death care professionals from around the world here came to my location here on East Tennessee. It was quite an honor, and of course they didn't know what to expect when they got here, but we were waiting for them, and so they got off this. We had two large buses of people that came in, and we ushered them straight into our chapel. And we sat them down just like you would for a regular traditional funeral. And we had a casket out there, but over the door of the chapel, the where we usually put someone's name, we just said Mr. Undertaker. And so we were burying Mr. Undertaker. And so it was a time of some levity and some fun time, but we also gave thanks for the great work that death care providers have done, as a profession for over the last 100 or so years. But it was a ritual that had some seriousness to it as well. And maybe you're right. Like, this was a nice ritual for our profession that it's time to bury this old and to move on to something else, to reimagine. And so we left the burial with Mr. Undertaker and went to my outdoor pavilion that runs right next to a creek. It was an outdoor area. And we gave them some exercises where they began to reimagine what death care and funeral service could look like as we move forward in caring for our communities, for those people who've had a loss. And we put all of our answers in a time capsule. And so we're going to hold it for a bit and come back and visit it, but it really got people thinking, just going through that ritual of saying, thank you. We've done some good things. We're also struggling in many ways. The traditional funeral doesn't mean as much to so many people anymore. It's a great parallel with what you're talking about with the church. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Well,
and so we said thank you. We had the ritual and we moved on. So yeah, maybe
Lynn,
you're on something. Yes, sir.
I think, Lynn, you would be the perfect person. Couldn't probably be any more perfect to lead a national movement to have a funeral for the traditional church. And I would help you with the reimagine part.
Wow.
But see if that vision takes hold.
That is terrific. We'll have to do some more talking.
Okay.
No, seriously, that's something just got teed up.
It really did.
Well, and I'd like to have another conversation when we have time about leadership. One of the most profound experiences I ever had, I went off and did a ritual work with Illumin, which is kind of a new manifestation of Richard Rohr's men's work that started out as males. Yeah. And I did a 5-day men's initiation rites. It was powerful. It was in the Aravaipa Canyon in Arizona. We drove from the airport. We were out in the middle of nowhere. It was gorgeous. It was really a powerful experience.
You didn't meet my friend Manuel Raskin down there when you did that, did you?
Well, I don't. I might have.
Okay.
I don't know. Is he a convener or does he do?
Yeah. And he's in Southern California, so I'm thinking he might have been a part of that. But
okay.
Yeah, and then I'm getting ready to do a sort of a weekend thing with another Illuminant group.
Oh wow!
So, yeah, those guys are serious business. Yeah.
It was serious, man. I'm telling you, because you could think, well, this is just kind of all made up, and rituals that nobody's sharing blood with each other and cutting your fingers and doing whatever. If you want to think about that as something that would you put your body in. But I'm telling you what, there were some things that it was transformative. But the thing that really impressed me the most or impacted me the most is when it was over, all the work was over, everybody's saying goodbye. Then we walked up into this really small little canyon area. It was this tiny little area, and it was a ceremony to say goodbye. And we were going to do the photograph up there, the photo of everybody and whatever. So you can imagine most of those things would be, hey, thanks, Bob. Thank you for doing this. Thank you. Here's our leaders. Thank them. I'll never forget this. 5 or 6 of the 7 leaders that facilitated all this, they knelt down, and just some of us common folk, I wasn't one of them, prayed over them and released them from their leadership position because they had been holding space for us and they weren't able to do their work because they were doing work of facilitating space. I'll never forget that. It's like, and they said in the prayer, as you go off to the airport or get in your car, may you be released from all of what you've held in the leadership role that you've had and go back to being named Bob or Jim or Mark. Man, it was so powerful. I thought because it so challenges that leadership hierarchical thing that you go off and you're still the leader and whatever. It was, I'd love to talk to you guys about leadership. That was so powerful. So powerful. It's been great to be together.
Well,
Randy.
I think our time's run out.
It has, man. We got to be done. We got to be done. You guys Randy's got to go do some farming. Lynn, you got to, well, I don't know what you're going to be up to tonight, but I got things to do too. Guys,
Right.
thank you.
Good
When
to
we
be with you guys.
hang in there, when I click off, and what it'll probably end up being about an hour and 10 minutes or so our time. It'll be digestible for folks. Randy, thank you for being here. Lynn, thank you for coming 20
Thank you guys.
miles away and being with us. And stay with me as I wait to see this upload. All
So I
right. God bless you
don't
both.
click leave.
Don't leave.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't leave.